On today's World Insight, chart the right course for China-U.S. ties. The call from Chinese President Xi Jinping as he meets face-to-face with U.S. President Joe Biden at the Bali G20 Summit. What does it mean for the future of bilateral relations?
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN. I'm Xu Qingduo, sitting in for Tian Wei. Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on U.S. President Joe Biden to chart the right course for China-U.S. relations in the Monday meeting on the sidelines of the Bali G20 Summit. It's the first face-to-face meeting between the Chinese and the U.S. presidents since Mr. Biden took office. President Xi also asked Mr. Biden that the two countries should take history as a mirror and let it guide the future.
国际社会普遍期待中美处理好彼此的关系。
The world expects that China and the U.S. would properly handle their relationship. Our meeting today has attracted the world's highest attention. We should work with all countries to bring more hope to world peace, greater confidence in global stability, and stronger impetus to common development. As always, I am ready to have a candid and in-depth exchange of views with you on issues of strategic importance in China-U.S. relations, global and regional issues. I also look forward to working with you to bring U.S.-China relations back to the track of healthy and stable growth to the benefit of our two countries and the world as a whole.
推动中美关系重回健康稳定发展的轨道，造福两国，惠及世界。
We share responsibility, in my view, to show that China and the United States can manage our differences, prevent competition from becoming anything ever near conflict, and to find ways to work together on urgent global issues that require our mutual cooperation. So, President Xi, I look forward to our continuing and ongoing open and honest dialogue we've always had, and I thank you for the opportunity.
What's the significance of the meeting on the prospects of China-U.S. relations? Let's loop in our panelists. In Beijing, Rongying, Vice President of China Institute of International Studies; Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies Program, National Institute for Global Strategy, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences; Anna Tangen, Political and Economic Affairs Commentator. Welcome to the show. Well, during the face-to-face meeting on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Indonesia, the talks between the two presidents went on for nearly 3 hours. Rongying, I will start with you. So what do you make of this first face-to-face meeting since basically 2021 in January?
Well, certainly this is a very important meeting for the relationship of China and the United States, and I think also for the history of China, of the China-U.S. relationship. The atmosphere is very much, I think, in a way, relaxed in a way, I would say. And also in diplomatic jargon, the meeting was conducted in in-depth, candid, and constructive. And if you look at the sort of press release out of the meetings, from the Chinese viewpoint, I think this is a quite positive and meeting in a way that would be followed through with more and more interactions and even concrete steps to stabilize the relationship and for a healthy relationship for the days or even years ahead. Having said that, I think differences remains, challenges are there. The most important thing is that these agreements, these consensus should be followed through. But more importantly, I think the United States should work hard to meet the Chinese side halfway so that the relationship would be bring back to the right track for stability, for stable and healthy development.
Zhao Hai, what's your takeaway?
Well, I basically agree with Mr. Rong Ying's analysis and evaluation of this very important, critical meeting between the two top leaders. One thing is very important. Out of this meeting, the atmosphere between these two countries are now changing. Even though it's gradual, it's just a small step towards a bigger goal. However, that's a good start. And from the press release, of course, we all read these two and compare these two. The differences, of course, remain. However, they agree to establish joint working groups to work on those difficult issues. And also, they restarted the cooperation on many of the global challenges, including public health, including climate change and food and energy security. So these are all good signs that the two sides wanted to maintain a healthy and stable relationship, despite the fierce competition that the U.S. side continued to press. However, Chinese side also laid down the basics of our strategic goals to the U.S. That is, China does not seek to overthrow the United States and does not want to change the current international order. So there are many things laying ahead for both sides working on, but this is a very good sign that in the future, these two top leaders will continue to talk to each other and will maintain an open line of communication, and that's good for both countries.
Well, Anna, President Xi mentioned that we need to play the leadership role, set the right course for the China-U.S. relationship, and put it on an upward trajectory. What does the right course mean, do you think, in the president's statement here?
Well, I mean, the right course is an acceptance by the United States that, different countries have different, legal systems, political systems, social systems, ideologies, etc. I mean, the U.S. couldn't be any more different from Saudi Arabia than it is from many other countries. This idea that somehow all countries have to conform to this kind of end of the world last man standing of Francis Fukuyama, that there should be only one type of government and economic system, hasn't worked in the past and it won't work in the future. So at this juncture, I mean, Xi Jinping is trying to be the adult in the room and saying, look, people are looking at us as the two big countries here. We need to work together. The United States, though, if you take a look at their readout, it was all about, you have to stop being so aggressive towards Taiwan. I think it's the U.S. that's sailing warships up and down the Taiwan Straits. Talk about Xinjiang, intellectual property, Hong Kong, Tibet, all of these things. These are all tired talk points, which you hear on a routine basis, put out by the State Department. But, there's no substance, it's just repetition.
Just, most of the time rhetoric. Rong Ying, as Anna pointed out, the U.S. side, of course, highlighted some of the differences. Mostly Chinese domestic affairs is really none of the U.S. business in the sense. But anyway, that's the U.S. So you mentioned about implementation. Why implementation is so important? Previously, President Biden talked about basically the 5 no's. No intention for regime change in China, change Chinese political system, or to launch a new Cold War against China. No intention to be allied with other countries against China, etc. Or no intention to support independence of Taiwan. But do you think the U.S. has, in the past at least, has followed through on those promises?
That's a big question, Mark. I think these 5 no's certainly are very important from the Chinese perspective. And this is also, I think, the political statement, pledges made by the United States, by the American side, by President Biden himself. Unfortunately, at least from what we have seen over the past years, they have not been followed through by the American side. That is raise a big question, the seriousness, the sincerity of these pledges, and that could become very problematic. And I would also echo, I think, Akin's viewpoint that if you look at the readouts of the United States side, it's quite heavily sort of a negative part in a way that because it touched upon a lot of issues from the Chinese, which Chinese side would strongly view that, and the issues of internal affairs that they don't want the United States to interfere. That is exactly, I think, China has been calling for. A kind of a relationship should be guided by mutual respect, recognizing there are differences between China and the United States. And these differences have been there for many years before, and it will be there for many years and in the future. The point is that China and the United States have different systems. Does not mean they could not coexist in peace. The important thing is that China and the United States should work together, and particularly the United States, as I think the two presidents agreed, to work out principles to guide, to pursue a right way to get along in a way that these differences will not be in a way undermine the healthy, stable relationship. That is, I think, the issue. That is the challenge facing the relationship, even though we are try our best to be optimistic.
Well, Zhao Hai, President Xi said that currently the state of China-U.S. relations is not in the fundamental interests of the two countries and the peoples. It is not what the international community expects from us either. Obviously, that use one word, probably that's not satisfactory. From the U.S. perspective, they would point a finger at China. But from Chinese perspective, if you look at the U.S. strategy on China, that's quite different from previous practice. For example, in the past decade, the U.S. Basically chose to engage with China, so-called engagement with China. But at least since Donald Trump, they talked about basically confrontation or a competition, and now with probably not that much cooperation with China. So that is also the problem probably to shape the relationship here.
Yeah, I think there are many problems, many issues between the two countries. And during the time of engagement, these issues have been talked about, discussed, and trying to find solutions. However, what happened is that President Trump came into office and completely abandoned the engagement. And the Biden administration actually followed up on the Trump administration's China policy. And that's the problem fundamentally, because they initiated this change and continue down the path of so-called fierce competition. However, the guardrails that already existed, like we've proposed, our position is that the three communiques are the guardrails for the China-U.S. relationship. However, the U.S. now wanted to establish something new. And in a way, on particularly China's internal affairs issues, particularly Taiwan, the U.S. is not on practice following these communiques and trying to hollow up the one China policy. So in a way that, if we wanted to repair this relationship and improve it, both sides needs to take responsibility, and the U.S. side at this point needs to take initiative to change the current status of the relationship. And it should start with, correcting the mistake and the unreasonable policies implemented during the Trump administration. China has called on the U.S. to have the political courage to change that for a very long time, and so far the Biden administration does not show any inch of responsibility to change that. So even though on rhetoric the U.S. side saying 5 no's, but in reality we're still waiting for the U.S. to take responsibility and make progress on this most important bilateral relationship. So no, we're not satisfied with the current progress on U.S.-China relations. However, after this meeting, I remain cautiously optimistic that gradually, with the opening of people-to-people exchanges and many more communication lines, we can reestablish some level of trust and make this relationship recover just as the COVID pandemic disappears.
Oh, Zhao Hai, a follow-up here. A question, from the Chinese side, you can see the Chinese side has stressed very much about bringing back the relationship on the right track of healthy and stable growth. But for the U.S. side, in particular, in the time running up to the summit, people talked about red lines, people talked about the bottom line, fierce competition. It seems like the expectation from the both sides, from the two sides, are quite different. But can we say that after the meeting, somehow they could work together and probably to build more trust? Starting some confidence in each other.
Yeah, both sides came into this meeting have two, I think, different level of expectations or different kind of goals. Because as President said during the meeting, that if the U.S. look carefully about China's 20th Party Congress report, it should understand and make no mistake of understanding China's strategic intentions. And the U.S. side continued to insist on this very distorted vision of China and understanding of China's strategic goals, and continue to try to believe that China is somehow trying to interfere into U.S. domestic politics, overthrow U.S. as a global dominant power, changing completely the international order, and somehow install or spread China's ideology and political system around the world. And with these wrongful ideas about China, how can you expect a good sort of relationship coming out of the two countries? Mm-hmm. So we need to go to the root and from the start correcting those mistakes and trying to, having some goodwill between the two countries and between the two peoples in particular to start to recover this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anna, if you look at the Biden government's China policy, some would say basically he's doubled down on the Trump policy on China, like a sweeping ban on the tech products export to China, and also pressuring allies to join the U.S. against China. And then, even economists, which is not pro-China, said that, one piece, it cited academics and business community people in the U.S. saying that Biden has gone too far on China. What do you make of that?
Well, he has. Today in the world, the biggest problem is trust. And you cannot have trust with somebody who's not reliable. The U.S. has proven itself unreliable, whether it's Kyoto or the Paris Climate Accord or the Iranian nuclear deal. And now it comes to these three communiques. So you just don't know from administration to administration what they're going to do. Maybe not Donald Trump, but somebody else will be the next president at some point. And things can change in a moment. So this idea that there's continuity has been destroyed, especially when Trump just, he walked out on everything. They had the big economic pact, the TPP, that the U.S. wanted to push, that had special considerations for the U.S. It would have been in its favor. He walked away from it. So, there's no continuity anymore. So, and I do agree, you have to go back to basics, and the U.S. has to commit itself to saying, look, every administration is going to be different, but American policy should follow along a certain line. And right now, all we see is a repeat of what happened with Japan. Back in the 70s, when Japan was seen as an existential threat to the United States, there was hysteria about it. Everything that was saying bad about China was then being said bad about Japan. And what did they do? They forced Japan to sign the Plaza Accord. And since that time, Japan literally has gone backwards. Today, Japan's economy is less than it was in 1986. So, these are things which China watches, and they're certainly not going to throw up their arms and say, okay, we capitulate, we will be your vassal state. We will subject ourselves to economic second-class citizen, a kind of economic apartheid, because you want to be on top.
But clearly, China is not Japan. Ruiying, if you look at the Chinese foreign policy, for example, toward the United States, which is stable and consistent, I think that's a contrast to what Anna has mentioned about the lack of consistency in the U.S. policy, in a sense, toward China. For example, Trump policy very different, giving up the engagement. But if you look at the relationship, which is important to both sides, but also to the rest of the world, they are the two largest economies and the two most powerful countries in the world, arguably. So yes, there's indeed imperative for the two countries to work together. But do you think the U.S. side, has realized that there's a responsibility too on their shoulder to work with China to make sure there will be a stable, at least, stable and workable relationship between the two sides?
Well, certainly, I think the United States does want China to play a role that would help share the so-called burden of the United States. But I think at least there are many analysts, both Chinese and Americans and others, international ones, believe that they does not want China to, or they are very much afraid of China would be replacing or taking over the role or the position of the United States, being the dominant or the number one, the world leader positions like that. So that is a kind of a contradiction I think the United States is facing. And China, as you rightly said, has been consistent and transparent in a way that China strongly feels, increasingly feels that its growth, at its rises, it will take more responsibilities. And being the first and second largest economy, it is imperative, it is a kind of responsibility, China and the United States, to shoulder and to work by working together to find a way to address the global challenges, the regional challenges for that. But within that process, I think the changes or the complications comes from the United States. The United States no longer has the confidence or have the I think the vision that by working with China, they would be able to continue to play a role that would help the world at large to address these challenges. This is something I think the problem, the root cause of the problem are like that. That's why I think we increasingly over the past few years, we've seen the talk about the failure of engagement of the United States towards China and the need to have a different sort of a strategy to outcompete China. I think China is not afraid of competition. If it is going to be healthy, if it is a kind of competition based on sort of rules that would be acceptable to the two sides. But China, I don't think it would be accept a kind of a rule that would be only made by the United States. That is not the fair way for competition.
Maybe there's a need of a change, probably, of the attitudes from Washington that you have to accept a developing China, which continues to rise, but with no intention to really to compete or replace the U.S. But turning to the importance of working together, Zhou-Hai, I think because it's the sideline of G20 Summit, for people who has good memories, like 2008 and 2009, the global financial crisis, China and the U.S., they joined hands and basically saved the world. And now people are looking at the two countries working together, not only saving the world, or economic recovery and probably preventing a global recession, but also to deal with other challenges, the climate change and also cross-border crimes, health crisis in the future, etc. There's a true need, a genuine need for the two countries to work together.
Yes, indeed. Remember, G20 started before the 2008 crisis, and after that crisis, it sort of breathed a new life because now you have a platform to gather all the important, big economies in the world to work together to try to recover the economy. And after that, I think G20 platform has persistently been a good platform for countries, top leaders together and to discuss important international economic issues. And today, it become a very key mechanism to help us work together, working on global challenges. And we've been seeing the gradual deterioration of global governance in recent years. There's a lot of deficit between the demand, the need of developing countries in the world, and there's a lack of offers or provision from the developed countries. So in order to bring two parties together, it's very important to sustain the G20 because G7 alone cannot solve the world problems. It's not inclusive enough. It's very much a exclusive club for the rich. So moving forward, I think these bilateral meeting of China and the U.S. is a good start for this year's G20, and hopefully it can breathe new life and it can sustain the cooperation that happened along the way in the past 10, 15 years and continue to provide G20 a viable platform for all the countries to work on jointly, working on those very difficult issues like particularly this year with the pandemic, with the war, with the instability around the world, with the geopolitical competition. At this particular moment, the world needs leadership, and the U.S. alone is not providing that, even though Biden administration claimed that they're trying to provide that because they need to have a broader base. And China is part of that, and they need more developing countries on board. I think now, again, this is a good start, but we still have a long way to go, and we need to see what's going to happen in the coming days in G20 and then after that, APEC.
Well, and that's a good point. I think the countries should come together and work together, develop the world, and also the emerging economies, China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, because G7 alone is not able to solve the world's problems.
No, absolutely. I mean, the G20 was created for one particular crisis, and the world is looking to it again to do that. But what did you have? This whole effort that was done by Indonesia was supposed to talk about technology, about the pandemic, about the economic situation, the debt crisis, etc. Climate change, no, it's been hijacked. The Europeans and America want to talk about Ukraine, which is not part of the G20, and they also want to talk about China and the relationship there. I mean, we have so many pressing economic and real ecological problems. It's just really hard to see why it's appropriate for the U.S. to come in and try to lecture other countries about issues that are internal. While meanwhile, the U.S. is exporting inflation and doesn't seem to really care about the rest of the world. I mean, every time the Fed increases the rates, it is driving the rest of the world into the poverty bin. They can't pay their debts. They don't have working economies, and inflation goes up.
Right. Well, briefly, just one sentence. I will start with you, Rongying. So, what's your comment on the Biden meeting, the first face-to-face meeting since Biden took office?
Well, certainly it's a great meeting. It's a meeting that promises a bright future and a stable relationship for the China-U.S. relationship if the agreements and consensus is being implemented and followed through with sincerity.
Implementation. Zhao Hai?
I think this meeting put a floor on the China-U.S. relationship, and hopefully it won't drop further, and starting from here to recover from a better relationship and for the better world.
Anna?
Long journey starts with one step. This is a very small step, but at least it's going forward.
Well, and that's all we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Xi Jinping on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us, and bye for now.